So let's go ahead and begin by describing the Master Control 400 configuration file. And again, that's found in the USI folder under the MC400-01 encode folder. Now, we're going to open this config file, and we're also going to probably find ourselves bouncing back and forth between the three different configuration files, more particularly this one and the SC4, as we're going to need some numbers out of the SC4 table. But let's begin here by going into this test MC400-01.conf file. So if you double click that, I have mine set up to automatically find it in WordPad. And I believe that on some occasions I've seen Notepad work, but WordPad is the preferred editor when we're going to go in here and perform this editing. Now, as you see this raw, as you see this raw config file, you will be running down through here and paying very close attention to all of the different, what we call headers. And you're going to find to the left of every one of these sections, there's going to be pound signs in part of that section, which is there only to remark out all of the descriptions and examples that you're going to see next to the pound signs. Everything that does not have a pound sign is required in the system here, or in the configuration file, in order for that particular device to function properly once we send this encoding back. Another thing to really pay close attention to when you're editing these config files is that you always want to make sure that you keep the amount of spaces, commas, capital letters, everything exactly like you're seeing it. So if you're going to be changing anything, you just want to literally overwrite what you're working with. So in this first section, what we're going to talk about is the first two sections. This one here is called the config definition data start, and the section just below it's called the miscellaneous start section. Okay, at startup, these are the sections that that the system uses to set up a few parameters, if you want to call it that. The config definition data start section, although all of these 5 lines are required for it to know who it's talking to and what it's doing, the line that's the most particular in what you're going to be setting this up with is this system name right here. Now, this system name is a name that is actually used for the master control panel to communicate over to the Master Control 400 that we're looking at right now. There is a place inside, and let's go ahead and go there. I'm just gonna tab back to our folder here. Let's go back up to the MCP 400 control panel. If we go into the encoding and open its configuration file, test MCP 400. Okay, now this is a little bit different. It also has a data start here and its own system name that you see here. However, if you scroll down, there's a section that we'll get to in a future session here that's under this 2020 chassis connect definition start. Okay, and right down here on this first line, in my particular example here, these systems can connect either over what we call an NMS or a naming convention or an IP convention. We prefer the naming convention. It's easier for the systems to find the names versus having to come up with, multiple IP addresses for them to search for. So this name that you see right here, this USI-MC4000 or 400-01, is the name, if you recall. I'm going to go ahead and close this one. Is the name that if you recall, we were looking at to begin with under the system name in the MC400-01 configuration file. That name needs to be exactly the same in both locations. So if you have multiple Master Control 400s, each one of them will have its own name, and its name will then go on the second line in the Master Control 400 panel, that naming section, and so forth. So each line each line represents a channel that it will be communicating to, and the name in that location in the panel must match the system name for that particular channel. These other 4 lines just need to be left as they are. You can put your customer name in here if you'd like. This doesn't show up anywhere, but when you're looking at the config file, you might like that to say what your company name is, or whatever you'd like in there. The next section is called the Miscellaneous Start section. And this section has multiple items that need to be addressed. And there's an example you'll see here in this upper section for each one of these particular areas. So as we go down and look at the individual, slide down here all the way till the pound signs are no longer there. And this is our section that we're talking about here. And one thing about this config file is each one of these sections has a description up at the top explaining what that can be set to, and just a brief explanation of what it's used for. This first line, the audio channels, is set at a default value of 00FF, which is the incoming audio it's allowing to see up to 16 channels. That's what the FF stands for, and that's the recommended value. The audio dim adjust allows you to, the default is a -15 dB, and the range can be set from a 0 to a -45 for dimming the monitor output, audio output, so that when you press the audio dim button, it will dim it down to that particular value, that -15. And so you can change that so it pretty much goes all the way off to a -45 dB. The video mix position is the slot or board location in the master control that the mix occurs on. 8 happens to be the video output slot for Master Control 2020, and for the MC400, this is not necessary to change this to anything. It actually, that's what you need to leave it at. And the same goes for these next 2 values. The key level reset mask and the transfer mask are both settings that need to be left at this default setting, as they pretty much, it just controls which keyer levels are going to be reset to off after a transition, or enabling which keyer level is actually transferred from the preset to the program on a transition. And primarily it's used to force the downstream keyer preset state to be in program, because all of the upstream keyers are always transferred. The transition speed can be adjusted here, and normal is actually 30 for what we call fast. Then there's a medium and a slow rate. Okay, 30 being a half a second and 120 being up to 2 seconds here. So you can change these to any value between that 30 and 120. And however, I would suggest that you look and try a transition to see if these are all okay. Generally, these 3 speeds are fine for whatever transition you're trying to make. This next line is the system logging. This name that you see here, this USI syslog01, is actually the name that's assigned to our USI logging program, which is also found on the C drive after you run the install 2020 for that particular logging application. And this allows the logging application, when it's running, to go out and find every channel that has this turned on, and simply just by putting whatever name you want in here to match whatever's in the USI logging. And that's how it knows who's online and how to log what needs to be logged. For switches, for serial interaction with automation, EAS, GPIs, whatever actually needs to be logged, and for whatever reason you would want the logging running, whether it's just to troubleshoot a problem or see what's going on in your system, what have you, but that's what that's designed to do. The Master Control 2020 actually has an auxiliary output called Preview Out, This is unused in the Master Control 400. The EAS interface that talks to the MC400 has the ability to engage what we call a macro. There's a macro section at the very bottom of this system that will, or of this configuration, that we will talk about in a little bit more detail when we get to that section. But this EAS automatic action will trigger that macro for it to run the audio or any other action that you want to happen via that macro. This line for the clean switch is also used with the 2020 system and not needed in the MC400 at this time. The individual rates allow the system to vary the audio on the preview button, and again, this is not needed or used in the MC400, so just leave it as not configured. Now, the MC400 line standard is the initial video standard that the MC400 will configure on a system reset. So when your system gets reset, powered down, or rebooted for any reason whatsoever, this is the line standard that needs to be in here. And if you look back up here in the examples, if we slide right all the way up to the line standards, these are the valid line standards that you can put in that particular line. So if your system has a 1080i and expecting a 1080i format for a reference, or let's say it's a PAL system, so it'd be a 50 hertz signal. Same thing with the 720p NTSC or 720p PAL, and we have our 525 and our 625 for PAL and NTSC also. That particular format needs to be exactly the same as the name that you see here. So copy it from up here and paste it down into that line format right here at the end. And what happens is it's looking for that particular line standard, so that when your system does reset and come back up, it will use this as the standard for knowing how to route your system. Now, if your system has multiple line standards, so that you're able to, on the touch screen of your master control panel, go between, let's say, a 1080i and a 525 SDI signal, then whichever one you would want this to default to when you perform a reset is the standard that you want to put in this line. Now, there's another section at the bottom that we'll go into more detail on that looks up all of the different formats, and whichever one you end up touching on the touch screen of your master control will take you into that particular format, and that's where you'll run from. This next line sets up the EAS operation mode, and you can either put manual here or auto. And the way that this works is whenever an alert shows up from whether it's a TFT or a Sage or a DASDEC, when that alert shows up to that particular EAS system, there's a mode inside of the Sage or the TFT that can be set to auto or manual. And if it's auto, it'll automatically send it on to us. If it's manual, then it'll be waiting for an operator or an individual to press the button to send that or to forward that EAS alert on. Our system works the same way. If this is set to auto, when we see that alert come into the master control, then we auto forward that on, and it goes ahead and performs whatever various items need to be addressed, such as this EAS automatic action, the macro that plays out at the bottom for the audio, and so forth. If it's set to manual, then when this comes into us, we then put up a warning on the screen that flashes in front of the operator, and it'll just sit there blinking, waiting for that to be manually pressed on a button that's assigned to the master control for this, which will then roll the EAS. Now, if it is in manual mode, and this operator maybe isn't there, or it's after hours and you have somebody and it's unmanned. What will end up happening is 2 lines down here, you'll see this EAS forward timeout. And after that many seconds, what will end up happening is the EAS will automatically play, even though this is in manual mode. Now again, this is in seconds, unlike the frames up above, but this one is in seconds, and it will play after that long of a wait. So now this EAS display time, that's minimum, is what that is, and this actually sets the minimum amount of time in seconds that an alert is to be displayed. Now, the amount that's put in here will run the EAS crawl for that long, even after the audio has completed. Now, if you want the crawl to stop when the audio completes, then you need to make this number as small as possible. The crawl will then run until the audio completes, even though this timer runs out. These next 3 items are generally unused, and it has to do with the Sage only, and gives the ability to be able to literally hold off an EAS alert for a certain amount of time. And you can read up in the examples up above on how to set this up if you desire this. But this is literally holding off an EAS without playing it for a certain amount of time, and that makes that possible through setting this up. This last item here, this startup config macro number, defaults to not configured, but you have the ability here to also create a macro down in the macro section for this to, on startup, if you ever have a reset or a reboot of your system or anything, this will run whatever you have set up in that particular macro down at the bottom automatically on a boot up. So for the most part, these that you see in your system are set to default settings, which in most cases come up and run just fine. You would need to make sure that your EAS automatic action, if you're using an EAS system with our master control, that we have this defined down at the bottom, and you need to make sure that your format is correct. Same thing with all the other EAS items here, but generally the defaults that you see here are the way that your system should come up and run.